You won't believe what happened when I parked my boat in front of my own house. A calm, typical day quickly turned into a full-blown drama, all thanks to one neighbor. Imagine this. You come home after a long day, unload your boat, and as soon as you step inside your door, you hear the sirens. Turns out, a certain HOA Karen called 911 because she thought my boat was an eyesore in the neighborhood. Sounds insane, right? But here's the twist. What she didn't know was that I'm a Navy commander, and I've spent years on the water. The idea that a boat parked in front of my house could be such a big problem was beyond me. Now, I could have just let it slide, but this was no ordinary complaint. Things took a crazy turn when I realized she wasn't backing down, and her complaints weren't just about the boat. As I was trying to handle the situation, she escalated everything in a way that left me questioning the real issue here. Was it just the boat, or was there more to this than I realized? Stay tuned, because things get even more intense from here, and trust me, you won't want to miss how it all unfolds. At first, I thought it was just one of those petty neighborhood disputes. You know, the type where people get upset over the smallest things. But this Karen wasn't backing down. She lived a few houses down, and I'd seen her before, always with a scowl on her face, always finding something to complain about. I figured she'd get over it, but when I looked out the window that afternoon, I saw her walking up to my front door. I wasn't sure what she wanted, but I figured I'd better brace for the worst. She knocked hard, like she was trying to make a point, so I opened the door. "Your boat is blocking the street," she said, as if it was the biggest crisis in the world. I tried to keep calm, explaining that I was just unloading it, and that it'd be gone in a few hours. But no, she wasn't hearing any of it. She started talking about HOA rules and how boats shouldn't be parked on residential streets and all this other nonsense. That's when things took a turn I didn't expect. She mentioned calling the cops. I honestly thought she was bluffing. Who calls 911 over a boat? But sure enough, not even an hour later, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens approaching my street. Something didn't add up. Why was she so determined to make this such a big deal? The tension was building, and I could feel this was just the beginning. As the sirens got closer, I felt my heart race. I thought about walking out and talking to the officers, explaining that it was just a boat and that I wasn't doing anything wrong. But when I saw the flashing lights through the window, a strange sense of dread washed over me. It wasn't just about the boat anymore. It felt personal. Something about this whole situation was starting to feel off. I grabbed my phone and called a friend who also served in the Navy, just to calm myself down. While I was waiting for the officers to arrive, I noticed that a few other neighbors were standing at their windows, watching the scene unfold. It felt like a spectacle. And that's when it hit me. This Karen wasn't just complaining about the boat. She was trying to make an example out of me. Maybe she thought I wouldn't stand up for myself, or maybe she had some kind of vendetta against me. Whatever it was clear she wasn't backing down. The police arrived, and one officer stepped out of the car. He was young, looked a little confused as he walked up to me. I didn't know what to expect, but I figured I'd be able to explain everything. But before I could even say a word, Karen was already talking over me, trying to tell her version of events. The whole thing was getting frustrating. She was spinning the story, making it seem like I was some kind of troublemaker. And that's when I noticed something strange. One of the officers glanced at her, then back at me, his expression changing. What was that look? Was he taking her side? Or was there more to this story than I realized? The tension in the air was thick. Karen kept yammering on about how I was disrupting the peace and how I was violating the neighborhood's image, while the officers just stood there, listening, nodding along. I could feel my patience starting to wear thin, but I wasn't going to let her get the best of me, not now. I stood my ground, trying to explain that it was just a boat, and I was just parking it temporarily, not leaving it there forever. But she wasn't listening. It felt like I was talking to a wall. Then, the officer who'd been silent until now spoke up. He said something that took me by surprise. "We've had complaints before about your boat, sir. The HOA's been in contact with us. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Complaints? I hadn't heard a thing. The HOA hadn't said anything to me directly. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me. It was starting to feel like there was a whole agenda at play here, something much bigger than a simple neighborhood rule. I glanced at the officer, searching his face for any clue about where this was going, but his expression was unreadable. Then, just as I was about to say something, Karen leaned in, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "You don't know who you're messing with," she said. "I've got connections." My blood ran cold. What was she talking about? Was this just about the boat, or was there something else brewing underneath all of this? I could feel the stakes rising with every word, and it was clear this wasn't going to end easily. My mind raced. What were her real intentions? And why was this becoming such a big deal? As the officers continued to discuss what to do next, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to snap, and I had no idea how bad it was going to get. The situation was spiraling, and I could sense we were all on the verge of a breaking point. Just as Karen finished her cryptic comment, I saw the other officer, the one who'd been mostly quiet, glance at his partner. There was something in his eyes, a shift in his expression that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Without warning, he stepped forward, his voice firm. "We've received multiple calls about your boat. It's not just the HOA anymore. The community's starting to complain too." I froze. Multiple calls. What was he talking about? I hadn't had a single complaint until Karen made a fuss, and now suddenly, the entire neighborhood was apparently up in arms. Something didn't add up. The whole situation was escalating fast, and I could feel my pulse quicken. This wasn't just about parking a boat anymore. It was about a much larger battle I hadn't even known I was walking into. Before I could respond, Karen shot me a smug look, as if she'd already won. "You really thought you could get away with this, didn't you?" she said, her voice dripping with triumph. I couldn't believe it. Was she really enjoying this? Was this personal for her? The officer, seemingly reading the tension in the air, turned to his partner and said, "Let's call in the HOA representative to mediate. This is getting out of hand." I wanted to scream. A representative? Was that really necessary for a boat? My frustration mounted, but as I opened my mouth to protest, I saw a shadow move behind the officers. I looked closer, my heart sinking when I recognized the figure. It was my next-door neighbor, a guy I had never had an issue with, until now. He stepped forward, his face tight with barely contained anger. "I'll take it from here," he said, his voice cold and steely. His words hit me like a bombshell. What the hell was going on? Why was he involved now? And why was he so angry? This wasn't just a neighborly complaint anymore. There was something much darker happening here. My next-door neighbor stepped forward, his cold gaze locked on me. For a second, I felt a pit in my stomach. What was he doing here? Why was he so involved in all of this? As he walked closer to the officers, I could feel the weight of the moment. Karen stood behind him, looking smug, like she'd just orchestrated some grand performance. It was clear that something had shifted, and I had no idea what was coming next. "Look," my neighbor started, his voice surprisingly calm, but I could hear the tension just beneath the surface. "This has been brewing for a while. We've all had issues with your boat." My mind raced. We? Issues? I had no idea there was any kind of group effort against me. Was this some kind of neighborhood conspiracy? Before I could say anything, Karen jumped in, nodding in agreement. "You just don't belong here. You and your military attitude, you think you were above the rules." I could feel the blood rush to my face, anger bubbling up, but I held it back. This wasn't the time for a fight. The officer who had been standing silently earlier finally spoke, his tone a little softer now. "We've had enough complaints to escalate this, sir. The HOA's made their decision." I turned to look at the officers, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you talking about? You can't just make decisions like this. This is my property, my right to park my boat where I see fit." The frustration in my voice was growing, but I couldn't back down now. Not after everything that had happened. Just when it seemed like everything was about to come crashing down, my neighbor spoke again, but this time his words took me by surprise. I've been trying to get the HOA to enforce this rule for months. The boat's not the issue, it's the constant disruption you bring. Before I could even process that, another voice cut through the air, one I wasn't expecting. My wife. She had come out the front door, looking calm but determined. "Actually, there's something you all should know," she said, her eyes sweeping over the group of us. There was a stunned silence. My neighbor's face went pale, Karen's smug expression faltered, and the officers looked at each other in confusion. My wife, with the perfect timing of a seasoned lawyer, had just dropped a bombshell. The HOA had no real power in this situation, and all of their complaints were based on false assumptions. The rules Karen and the others had been waving in our faces didn't even exist. For a moment, the chaos seemed to freeze. The officers, now realizing they'd been dragged into something they didn't fully understand, began to back off. Karen, still processing the information, looked like she was about to explode, but I didn't give her the satisfaction. I stood there, my heart still racing, as everything began to settle. But just as I thought we were in the clear, my neighbor did something I never expected. He took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't over," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. He wasn't finished. Neither was Karen. And that's when I realized, while this battle might have been won, the war had just begun.